It still works, and that's what's depressing. But the plucky democracy in Ukraine, well, the lead opposition party was banned. That was a few months ago. All the opposition parties have been banned. The opposition leader is now in jail. It's funny because you hear about Navalny in Russia, who gets like 2% of the vote. There are like 5 people, including his mother, who vote for him. And yet he's the cause celeb when he's in jail. But the lead opposition party leader is in jail right now. All opposition media, all non-pro-Zelensky media has been banned in Ukraine. If that were Belarus or anywhere else that's in the targets and the crosshairs, we'd be hearing about it. We don't hear about it now. So the reality versus the narrative, we have to create the narrative that we are saving a plucky democracy. And in the meantime, and this I think is partly the real issue that's going on, for 2 years the medical industrial complex was cleaning up. If you own stock in Moderna or Pfizer or Johnson & Johnson, through the roof, you are doing great. But the military industrial complex was getting a little bit jealous. Hey guys, we need a warrior. You know, these mansions in McLean are not going to build themselves, right? And so what do we get? $60 billion. And that's just since February 24th. $60 billion is half of Ukraine's entire GDP for 2021. We bought Ukraine, right? And we bought it. But in fact, that money's not being sent to Ukraine. We all know that. We're all grown-ups in the room. The money's being sent just across town to Raytheon, to Lockheed Martin, to the military-industrial complex. That's where the money's going. And a good chunk of it's going to the NGOs and all these myriad of, they're going to make life better for women in Ukraine and all this sort of thing. There's a lot of money. There's a little bit for everyone, right? There's a little bit for everyone. $60 billion. And you'll all remember that when they wanted to do, Biden said, you know what, I need $31 billion to send over Ukraine. Congress said, hold my beer, we're going to give you 40. How's that sound? Okay, that's just a down payment. Then a guy from Kentucky stood up and says, maybe we can at least hire an accountant or a bookkeeper to see what's happening with his money. And of course, you would have thought, I don't know what you would have thought. The ton of bricks came down on Senator Paul for even suggesting. He didn't say no money. I know in his heart he was thinking no money, but he was picking at the right fruit. Hey, can we at least get a special inspector general like we had for Afghan reconstruction, Sopko, who did a great job and who concluded that we flushed billions of dollars down the drain, and that the U.S. government encouraged people to lie all the time about the success in Afghanistan. No, we can't do that. So what we have is a massive money laundering scheme, and that's exactly what this is. Let's be frank. All East Europeans, and you got to kind of hand it to them because they played this game under Soviet rule too, in a way. So they're getting rid of all their junk. They're sending it to Ukraine. It's no good. They're sending tanks from World War II. I've seen World War I guns over there, and then they're coming back to Brussels and saying, hey, we got rid of all of our tanks. Can we get some new German tanks? The Poles are great at this. They wanted to send all these junky old MiGs and get F-16s, modified brand new F-16s in return. So this is a money laundering scheme. We know about this because we gave them all our Stingers. And Raytheon says, oh man, we ran out of Stingers. We need some money to make some Stingers. So they just got $600 million to make some more Stingers. So it's a great business, and we talked about on the show the double-digit increase in stock prices for the military-industrial complex. You have a lot of myths. Ukraine is winning. Russia expected a quick victory. They had to run out of Kiev with their tail between their legs. Scott will talk later about the fact that this was a feint. I don't want to preempt, but certainly Colonel McGregor talked about how this is a classic feint trick to keep them tied up around Kiev while the real goal was Donbass. That's not really for us to discuss here. So this went, up until just about a few weeks ago. And then all of a sudden, Dr. Paul was mentioning it to some friends at our table, all of a sudden something weird happened this last week. I'm sure you all noticed it. The mainstream media started rethinking this thing, right? Because they're terrible liars. But when it gets too obvious, well, they want to be the first to turn. Well, we knew it all along. Or the best one, well, no one saw that coming, right? No one saw that coming. So you saw Washington Post. There was an amazing piece a few days ago. The New York Times, The Economist, they love war. The Hill even talked about, well, things aren't as amazing as we thought they were. And I think this is important. And this is a great piece in The Hill. I'm going to read just a couple lines from it. Foreign wars tend to be most popular at the outset, particularly if they are marketed to the American public effectively in morally unambiguous terms. But unless they end fairly quickly in decisive victory, achieved at reasonable cost, public support and policy consensus begins to erode. And that's what we're seeing. We talked on the show about a major poll from March, and then another one in late May, where you saw the support for the major U.S. role from mid-60 percentile now to 45%. So people are losing interest because they're seeing that the things that they were told, the lies they were told, as we were told about Iraq, etc., are coming unraveled, and this isn't a super easy, low-cost victory for that plucky democracy. And again, Biden's promise of the ruble being rubble is not the case, and in fact we are suffering. We talked about this, I think, on Thursday on the show, how the Russians have a record current account surplus in their trade, and ironically they are actually funding their war by selling super expensive oil. So as I joked on the show, I mean, if you had injected agents into the U.S. government, actual Putin agents, to like engineer this so Russia comes out looking great, they could not have done a better job. So there you have it. And here's another thing I noticed. Ruble trade volumes have surged 1,067% since the Ukraine war. You know, guys, you know what that spells? The end of the dollar hegemony. And that's the real thing. And I know Tom's going to talk about this later. The end of dollar hegemony is on the horizon because of this. It's a self-inflicted wound. Here's another amazing piece. And this is just the 2nd of June in the Hill. And this is an established publication. Andrew Latham, The Unpalatable Truth in Ukraine. We were not hearing this when they wanted that $60 billion. Like I said, and the truth is, he's talking about Sherlock Holmes and Arthur Conan Doyle, about how Sherlock Holmes says, when you eliminate the absolute impossible, whatever's left, however improbable, is the solution. And so here's what he says based on that. And the truth is, once we've eliminated all the impossible scenarios, the least improbable outcome of the war in Ukraine is a Russian victory. And that's pretty amazing coming from the Hill. It's worth reading this article because into the improbable scenarios. But you see this over and over and over. You can see it everywhere how the media is doing a shift. And so, Act 3 of our Act 4 drama, Act 4 of our Act 5 drama, is the danger. As this is shifting, we are facing a real danger. This goes back to how I started. This $40 billion was spent. And now we just heard a couple of days ago that for the first time after resisting, the U.S. has decided to send multiple launch rocket systems to Ukraine. And this is a game changer in many ways. They've said, well, we're going to limit the range. We're not going to let it go 400 kilometers, maybe go 50 miles. But this is a big deal if it gets through to the front lines because it's a serious escalation. These aren't these little howitzers that are being pulled and this and that and the other. And here's something that from an article, this is political, I'll watch you in a second. And oversight concerns are at the forefront as the newly announced $700 million package for the first time includes more advanced precision-guided rocket system that will allow Ukraine to strike targets even further away, potentially in Russia. This is a big deal. This is why we're sitting here today, because we're facing the potential of nuclear annihilation. Zelensky assured Washington, we're not going to use this in Russia. Don't worry, no problem. Just send them over quick. We're not going to use them. Well, here's a couple of quotes. Zelensky's spokesman, responding to a question about whether the restrictions on the use of U.S.-supplied rocket systems apply to Crimea, he said, quote, Crimea is ours. It belongs to Ukraine, and the Russians know it. Therefore, they will fly to Crimea double time should the need arise. Okay, well, that lets you know what they're thinking. Igor Chernev, who's a Ukrainian member of parliament, he echoed that sentiment, and he said that Russian aircraft and military stationed on Russian territory are legitimate targets. Quote, we have taken on certain obligations, but no one can guarantee where the missile will strike. Kiev has its own weapons, such as howitzers, self-propelled guns, tactical operational missile complexes, which can reach such targets, he told local news. So essentially what he's saying is, yeah, we promised that. We promised a lot of stuff, We're not serious about this. I mean, it goes to Kiev, come on, right? And so here's where the danger comes in. Former president and current head of their National Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, he warned on Thursday that if Ukraine uses U.S.-supplied missile systems against Russia, Moscow, quote, will have no choice but to be forced to retaliate against decision-making centers. And that's a full period there. He did not say in Ukraine, right? And then he followed it up with an interesting quote. He said, one can believe that the horsemen of the apocalypse are already on their way, and all hope is in Almighty God. If that's not chilling, right? And as we know, the Russians don't bluff. Whether you love them or hate them, they have not bluffed. They don't bluster like Washington blusters. They said, if you do this, we will do that, and they did that. And here's another in the danger chapter, cyber hacking. We admitted on the first, the head of the NSA, General Paul Nakasone, told Sky News that the U.S. is actively using offensive cyber warfare against Russia. But they don't believe that that's going to trigger a response. And I look back because I was sure this happened. June 1st, 2011, BBC published headlines. U.S. Pentagon to treat cyber attacks as, quote, acts of war. So here we are admitting that we're doing offensive cyber attacks against ourselves. If you do it to us, we consider it an act of war. So, back to the beginning. This is the final act. What is the Biden doctrine? And we won't be able to find a definitive definition, but I would offer this, that the personnel is the policy, and we knew that from the Trump administration. Trump talked a pretty good game on foreign policy, and he had some pretty decent things, but ultimately the personnel was the policy. In every significant position, he put in a dope neocon. You know, John Bolton, McMaster, all these guys, Pompeo, all these are the only decent foreign policy decision, as far as I can see in terms of personnel, was literally in the last days of his presidency when he put Colonel McGregor in as the senior advisor to the acting Secretary of Defense with the task of, and McGregor has verified this, hey, get us out of Afghanistan and Syria, okay? You've got 5 days to do it. There, okay, I know McGregor's a hardworking guy, but that's kind of a tall task. But let's look at the personnel in the 5 minutes we have left. This is a great, by the way, a great series. It's in the Asia Times. James Carden, who's another realist, but I think a good writer. It's a four-part piece worth looking at. The first part was appeared on May 3rd, called "The Company Men Behind Biden's Foreign Policy Blog." And I won't go into each person, but I will point out there is one theme that runs through everyone that's working for President Biden, and that is these are people who have spent their entire career inside the Beltway. They started out, most of them, many of them, they started out in the Clinton administration. And remember how we started. It was Clinton who decided to expand NATO, despite assurances to the Soviet Union and then Russia about expanding it. So no wonder these people think it's a great idea for Ukraine to be in NATO, because they are the authors of the idea of NATO expansion. They are the ones that are driven by this sort of messianic zeal of spreading freedom worldwide, and it's also very profitable. But down to the person, you'll see people who worked for Clinton, people who worked for Obama, Jake Sullivan. You talk about Victoria Nuland. Her protege was Strobe Talbot, who was the architect of Clinton's expansion of NATO at the time. These are people, everything that we're seeing happening right now are things that they have put in motion 30 years ago. And a great point that was made, by the way, by one of the very good guys is Chas Freeman, Ambassador Chas Freeman, who's also a realist leaning in our direction, a sage person. And he makes this point, and this is something that I'll sort of leave you on. Outside of Central Intelligence Agency Director William Burns, deep expertise on Russia is thin on the ground in the Biden administration. And here's Chas Freeman. He says, it took about 8 weeks for the administration, in the person of NSC advisor Jake Sullivan, to enunciate war aims for the proxy war. And this is why we're in danger. These people have no experience with Russia. They're not Russia speakers. They have no background in it. And here's Chas Freeman. At the outset of its response to the Russia invasion, the administration was careful to limit possible provocation of the Russians. But, not having seen direct retaliation from Moscow, it has become progressively less cautious. Hence our discussion of MLRS launchers. This lack of caution, Chas Freeman continues, is aided by the fact that it is Ukrainians, not Americans, who are dying, and by the success of pro-Ukrainian propaganda and the effective Western ban on contradictory information from non-Ukrainian sources. Freeman concludes, there is a risk that the administration will inhale its own propaganda and underestimate the risks it is taking. And that's what we're seeing. That is the danger of having your foreign policy guided by the Wolfowitz Doctrine, and we all know what that is, which is still, it's got a little bit of humanitarianism sprinkled over it. That's essentially what it is. So our foreign policy is being run right now by career mediocrities who inhale their own propaganda, we would say high on their own supply, and they are leading us dangerously, dangerously toward nuclear annihilation. Thanks very much.
Hold on. Still stuck here. Hold it because it's going up here off of there. You should have gone left.
Jesus, you literally see it.
Very different. She said it wasn't on her. I know I won't. I didn't go for it. Come on in here.
Because, yeah, we're going to people that can't make their mind nasty.
Now we need to fix it.
It's right here.
Okay.
Is it right?
Why are you actually dancing so much?
Very